Joanne Watson. Jag heter snart för finskastudien där framme hätti. Efter att jag systemen och Australien. Ja, nu vill jag bara begära tacka Aðstoð för att komma och starta det här föreställningen. Jag vill med tacka idag. Inte för uttrycka vid klockan 9 är inte Joanne Watson att lyfta av för nyttigt att lyfta av att det är klockan 10 när det kaffet ner i 30 minuter och slapp sig för det frammansfallen. Tack för det. Jag gör aldrig.
Okay. Wowee, look at you all. When I was first invited to come to Iceland, I said to Jon, are you sure people will come? But you have, so thank you. This is wonderful. And it's an absolute honour and a privilege to be here to talk to you today. I can't thank Jon enough from the ministry for helping me to come here today, and all week. I've had a wonderful week so far, and lots more to come. It's just been wonderful, and I'm really enjoying your country. So we have something in common, I believe. It's very exciting for us as a nation too to get into the World Cup. So it would be, Geeson and I were talking the other day about how wonderful it would be if we met in Russia in the final. That would be just terrific. So hopefully we'll see you in Russia. This is a celebration of the Australian Socceroos team winning over Honduras. I think it was last week. It was while I was away. So exciting things are happening. I first met Jon and some others of you here in Galway, Ireland in May this year. May, June, can't remember. It was a little bit warmer than here at that time, but they say it's not usually that warm. But that's all of us at the summer school. Those of you who know anything about the summer school in Galway, you will know it's a wonderful week of people spending time together, friendship, learning, but most of all, really pushing the agenda of human rights for people with disabilities. It's just such a fantastic time. People come from all over the world. So if ever you get an opportunity to go to the National University of Ireland, Galway, I recommend that you do. I believe that Professor Gerard Quinn was here some weeks ago, and some of you may have met him, and he's the man that runs the summer school. Now, I have experimented with this phrase. I'm not sure I could have been lost in translation, but I'm going to try. The raisin at the end of the hot dog's nose was the raisin for me was being invited to your beautiful country. So thank you. Okay, so we all live in a time and a place where we are inundated with choice, with autonomy, with freedom. Actually, I say all, I'm going to take away that word all. We live in a time and place where many of us in the West are inundated with choice. I was in Thailand, Bangkok, before I came here, and I took lots of photos because I was overwhelmed by all of the choice that was there in front of me, and I wanted to use one of those photos, but I couldn't pick the right one. There was just too much. It's a very interesting time that we live in. We live in a very neoliberal society where individualism is key. And this is not new. Philosophers like Aristotle, have been talking about this thing called autonomy since antiquity. I can just see them, hanging around in their white robes, talking about what it means to live a self-determined or an autonomous life. It's something that's been important to us all forever. And if we break down that word, auto, meaning self, nomi, meaning governance. So it's about the self, it's about us driving our own decisions, being the author of our own life. And we have autonomy. Most adults have autonomy. Many children don't have autonomy. This is when he was my youngest, who was about 5 months old there, and that was actually in Ireland, and he really wanted to drink his father's Guinness, but he didn't have that choice, thank goodness. He was very keen on that Guinness. So there are certainly limits to autonomy. And I want to talk to you today about whether this right to autonomy is a universal right. It's controversial. It's controversial within the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 12 in particular. We know that we all people here enjoy autonomy, but there are people in the world that don't enjoy autonomy. And that's not just because of political sanctions, because of refugee status. I don't know how many of you have read the news about my home country in Australia. I'm very ashamed of our government at the moment who have taken away the liberty of many men on Manus Island. Yes, I'm very sorry. But we know that there's people all over the world who have had their liberty removed. And this isn't only because of political sanctions. This is, and refugee status. This is people with intellectual disability all over the world right here, right now, are having their right to self-determination removed from them. And you know this. They often don't have choice about who they live with. And that might be because they have behaviours that challenge some of us. So the system needs to put everyone together to help with services, everyone that has behaviours of concern, whatever they are. I just think they're communication. But so we know that many of the people we support aren't living self-determined lives. So who am I talking about here? Who am I here to talk to you about? And I'm going to unapologetically use a term that sometimes I am criticised for. Severe and profound intellectual disability. And I want to put the emphasis on profound because the friends that I have with profound intellectual disability are certainly profound people. I think that we need to acknowledge that this group have significant cognitive disability and therefore have significant communication issues. They will communicate using facial expression, gesture, again, behaviours of concern or challenging behaviours, behaviours that challenge many of us. They communicate in many, many ways, but they do indeed communicate. And this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about what that communication might look like. So this is two of my friends from Melbourne. Both these men have significant, profound cognitive disability. They certainly have a lot to say, though. A lot to say. And I'm going to borrow from my friend and many of you, your friends' work, Gerard Quinn, again from Galway. He is talking, he's spreading a message at the moment around this idea that cognition, that the fact that we privilege cognition is a problem. So we live in this society where we value cognition above everything, intellectual capacity above everything. We value it, and it helps define personhood. Okay, we say that somehow you're more of a person if you have a very sophisticated intellectual capacity. Have a look at our universities, of which I am part. Have a look at the way that we value us as people. And there is a hierarchy of personhood. And Gerard believes, and I believe, that it comes down to your intellectual capacity. Something that Gerard has alerted me to is this idea that where did this come from? When did we start to, as a species, as human beings, when did we start to value intellect as something that defined our personhood? And he would argue that it was around the Age of Enlightenment. Suddenly we started to see humanity as being defined by how bright we were, how intellectually complex we were. But you all know that the people that you support, the people that you know and love with intellectual disability, are not defined by their intellect. There's other characteristics that make them human. And I think that we really need to challenge this concept, because I think it's becoming more and more of an issue in our society, in our very neoliberal society. So this group of people don't communicate using words. They don't communicate using symbols. And they may not even communicate intentionally. So what I mean by that is they may communicate with their body language without even understanding that their communication can have an impact on somebody else. I'll talk a little bit about that later on this afternoon. And we know that the less formal a person's communication, the fewer opportunities they have for choice and control. So the academics amongst us, we like a little bit of a reference every now and again. These are some scholars and researchers that have done some great work in this area. People like Michael Weimer. There's a lot of people out there who have engaged in research, decades of research, that tell us that the more severe someone's cognitive disability is, the fewer opportunities they have for choice and control. And we really are struggling with how to achieve choice and control for everyone, particularly people who communicate informally. And we have a saying in English that I'm not sure if it translates, where, Someone will say, if they think something is really easy, they will say, it's not rocket science. What's wrong with them? And it's something that's used in this, in my work, I hear people say it often. It's not rocket science to interact with someone with a severe and profound intellectual disability and to hear their preference. I think it is rocket science. And I think that it is really difficult, and I think that we need to acknowledge that so that we can put the resources into our systems that are necessary. While we say it's easy, we're ignoring the fact that this is a really hard thing to do, to interpret someone's communication, who is communicating perhaps unintentionally and informally, is very, very difficult. So what does the UNCRPD tell us? You're all very familiar with it, I'm sure, as a signatory nation, and I hear about to ratify. Thank you, Minister. So, you know, some of the key principles here are freedom, autonomy. This is the first, the Article 1 of the Convention. And it says promote, that signatory nations have an obligation to promote, protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. Now, Article 12 is an article that we're here to talk about today, and I think it's a really important article of the Convention. And I think it's so important because it cuts to the heart of what it means to be human. And that is somebody's right to have their will and preference interpreted and acted upon. That, I think, is what makes us human. Yeah? So Article 12, equal recognition before the law. What this means is that you are seen as a person before the law. When you have your, when a nation or signatory nation doesn't adhere to Article 12, a person's right to equal recognition before the law is removed. So persons with disabilities enjoy legal capacity on an equal basis with others in all aspects of life. And what is this thing called legal capacity? It's the right to make one's own decisions. And I think it's what cuts to the heart of what it means to be human. And what the Convention tells us is that signatory nations shall take appropriate measures to provide access to persons with disabilities to the support that they may require in exercising their legal capacity. And that, for us here in the room, is the crux of Article 12. And that is the bit that I think is rocket science. It's very difficult. And we need to work together, we need to work hard, we need to talk, we need the resources to do this well. And what Article 12 does is represent this paradigm shift from substitute to supported decision making. So there is argument around what Article 12 actually means in terms of practice, but I think the General Assembly would be fairly clear in that they believe that what it means is that guardianship should not exist. It's a very difficult, I think that's a very difficult thing to say. I think it's about how we define guardianship and how we do guardianship. I think it's about the practice of guardianship, but we could talk for days about that. So we're faced with lots of barriers, though. You know, as I said, we live in this neoliberal society. It's all about us as number one. What we know about hearing the will and preference of people with severe and profound intellectual disability is that it needs to be done collectively. We need to have shared autonomy. And that's what supported decision-making is. That's what Article 12 is asking us to do. But we still have people in the world that think very differently to all of us in the room. And this is a quote from a Melbourne philosopher, bioethicist, Peter Singer. Many of you would probably know of his work. It's a very old quote, but I know Peter personally, so I do know that this is something he still believes. He's now in Princeton, I think. I'm pretty sure he's still at Princeton. I'm looking at Reinvig. Yeah. But this is something that he said way back in 92, and it's not taken out of context, and if he was here today, he would stick to it, I'm sure. And he says, talking about the people that I'm talking about, such people, it is argued, lack the capacity of reason, of self-awareness, and of self-determination. These attributes define personhood, and consequently, their absence means that an individual lacking them is therefore not a person. From this perspective, euthanasia for such non-persons is acceptable and indeed should be actively pursued. So this is what we're dealing with here. We have very world-renowned scholars like Peter Singer, who advocate very strongly for this. But then we have people like Professor Quinn from Ireland, and he says he's talking about the Enlightenment, probably had the largely accidental effect of narrowing down our understanding of the essence of personhood, an essence that telescoped narrowly into cognitive disability. So he's asking us to question that idea that cognition is directly linked to our personhood, in direct contrast to Peter Singer. So, supported decision-making. What is it? This is a definition that I have come up with through my research, and it particularly applies to people with more severe and profound intellectual disability. So supported decision-making explicitly recognises that choices are made within a social context. We make decisions together. All of us do. And therefore, it is likely to benefit those who require support from people who know and love them to make decisions. I don't think that's rocket science. Supported decision-making makes the assumption that everyone can guide their own decisions with support, and therefore challenges the notion of individual decision-making incompetence. So what we're looking at here is looking at decision-making capacity differently. That we all have capacity to make decisions if we have the right amount of support to do so. Think about the decisions that you made this morning. Many of you made some decisions, I'm sure. Some of those decisions you probably made on your own. But many of them you probably made with someone else. You know, I'm going to this really important conference. What will I wear? Do I look okay? You know, asking the people that you know and love for support to make a decision about perhaps what you wear. Make a decision about who's going to pick up the kids after the conference. Make a decision about what you put in the kids' lunch. Although I do believe that children here have their lunch provided for them. What a civilised country you lead. That's amazing. So we all make decisions with support from people who know and love us. And the question we have is, does Article 12 and supported decision making have the potential to resolve this inequality? I think it does. And the reason why I started on this journey around looking at Article 12 and its application for people with severe and profound intellectual disability is because I've been working in this sector for many, many years as a speech pathologist before I became an academic, as a family member, and I saw a trend where we have these amazing movements like the person-centred practice movement, self-determination movement, that started in the 70s and the 80s, and they were terrific. They were wonderful. However, there was a group of people that I thought kept getting missed out. When I talked to the person-centred planners that I worked with, so you have person-centred planners here that will help develop individualised plans for people? Maybe not. But I would talk to those people and say, this is great work you're doing, but where's someone who doesn't use words to communicate, or who communicates informally? And they say, well, we haven't got a way of knowing what their will and preference is. So there was the gap, and I think that is the gap. We need to try and work out how we can build that bridge. And I really love this quote from Values in Action in the UK many years ago, well before the convention was born. And here this quote is talking about supported decision making. And it says the starting point is not a test of capacity, but the presumption that every human being is communicating all the time, and that this communication will include preferences. Preferences can be built up into expressions of choice, and these into formal decisions. And from this perspective, where someone lands on a continuum of capacity is not half as important as the amount and type of support they get to build preferences into choices. So the emphasis is on the support. It's no longer, what we're asking here, what supported decision making is asking us to do, what Article 12 is asking us to do, is to change the mindset, to reconceptualise what we mean by decision making capacity, to include support, that shared autonomy. So I think it's about reconceptualising decision-making capacity. And I think we can reconceptualise it by saying that decision-making capacity is the ability of a person to make or participate in a decision either independently or through a collaborative process of support from a group of people in the concerned person's life who know and love them. And this definition embraces the interdependent and collaborative nature of decision-making, particularly for people who communicate informally and sometimes unintentionally. And it rejects the notion of individual decision-making capacity. And just on that, something that often surprises me, we talk about the importance of teamwork and collaboration in our workplaces. We get congratulated when we're a team player. So it's a good thing. But when someone with an intellectual disability asks for help to make a decision, consults, we say they don't have decision-making capacity. But so many of us look to the people we know and love and to our teams to help make good decisions. But for some reason, we go back to that cognitive assessment of someone. You know, the neuropsychologist, well, in my home state of Victoria, it's the neuropsychologist that has the last say as to who has decision-making capacity, and it's based on their cognitive capacity. So we get by with a little help from our friends. In the words of the Beatles. We really do. And I'm not sure of you, how many of you are Billy Bragg fans. He's my hero. And he says, you know, that wonderful song, he says, "The world amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in a union." And we know that. And we have to apply this idea of union and collaboration to the people we support. Yun introduced me to the sagas, thank you. And my family, thank you too. My 12-year-old boy particularly, it's just the most perfect thing for a 12-year-old boy. He said to me, who does that? Who has their head chopped off and then uses their head to kill someone else as a weapon? What country are you going to, Mum? And I'm not even going to try and pronounce this. Yun said I needed to say it in a Viking kind of way, but I'm going to say, "Bare is the back of a brotherless man." I searched the sagas for a quote that would define what I'm trying to say here. So I was very happy when I found this one. And it essentially means that you're defenceless unless you have someone to watch your back. We need each other. We're relational beings. That's who we are. That is what defines our personhood, not our cognition. So this idea of relational autonomy that many of you might be starting to hear about, and I think it has merit, it's a concept that I think makes sense to the people that I know and love and support with severe and profound intellectual disability. The traditional notion of autonomy as involving self-sufficient independence and boundaries against others is unhelpful. So what we're saying here is let's not think of autonomy as an individual concept. Instead of rejecting it, autonomy can and ought to be reframed around the idea that self-determination is consonant with the importance of the role of others in relation to that self. So I was interested in how we can apply some of these concepts to people with severe and profound intellectual disability. So I engaged in a research project where I followed 5 people with intellectual disability and their support networks. Sometimes I had to help build a support network around them because we know that there's many people who have no one in their life who is not paid to be there. And when we say that to people outside of our field, they go, "Oh no, surely." We know that there's people who have no one in their life that's not paid to be there. So building a circle of support around someone is often very challenging. But I focused on 5 people with severe and profound intellectual disability, and I used a model of supported decision-making that I have developed, and I trained this group of people. We focused on one particular decision that person might be facing, and we explored that decision. So my research was a qualitative research study where I witnessed what was happening within that process. And I followed, my data collection took a long time. In some cases it was 1 or 2 years, and it might be a decision that they were faced with that took that long. And that's where we say, you know, it's resource intensive. It's not an easy thing. So this was my research design. It was an action research study. 5 people with severe or profound intellectual disability and their circles of support. We used a supported decision-making intervention over a period of 3 to 6 months, but that was on average. Sometimes it was one year. And we interviewed, we had focus groups, questionnaires and observation as our data collection. And we interpreted it qualitatively. I know that this is not necessarily an academic audience, so I won't bore you with the analysis. And this was the decision-making framework that I developed, that I guided circles of support through. So it was about identifying a decision and what the options might have been, listening together, exploring options and building these, and making decisions and acting on them. And at all the time, we were documenting. I use a lot of video. When I say document, I'm not necessarily writing down, sometimes I am, but video is, I'm finding, very, very valuable, particularly around those to try and interpret those very subtle communication systems. So just to explain to you how it worked, this is Tom, not his real name, and I have permission to share with you his story. He communicates using a lot of eye movement. He doesn't smile a lot, but when he does, it's amazing. He has a beautiful hum that those of us who know him really well know that, think that that means he's content and he's happy. So we were interested to know what he would like to do on the weekend. Some of the people that supported him felt he was really bored on the weekend. So we spent some time exploring some options. What we did is we used a tool that I will talk about more this afternoon called the Preferred Activity Analysis, which I have developed and I'm really happy to share with you. And what that does is ask circles of support to really brainstorm around what a person's likes and dislikes are. So we might say, I might say to a group of people, what does he like to do? What really is a good day? What does a good day look like? And they will say, when he goes swimming. Swimming is really important. Let's unpack that activity. What is it about swimming that makes it really lovely? Is it the water? Is he someone that really enjoys water? Or is it that Bob, his favourite support worker, always takes him swimming? Or is it that he gets to have a coffee with Bob after swimming? So what is it about that activity? We pull it apart. We spend hours pulling it apart. And occupational therapists in the room, those beautiful task analysis that you do so well. I'm looking for my OT friends. So we really pull it apart. What is it about that? Is it the water? Is it the water's warm, like in your pools, or freezing cold, like in ours? Is it, what is it? So we really pull that apart. And then once we've come up with a list of things that we really think he enjoys, we try to match some activities that represent those things. So for Tom, what we know or what we decided as a group is that he really enjoys wind on his face. He really enjoys movement, so much so that he will stick his head out of a moving car window if we don't support him not to take that risk. So that's a challenge. So we unpacked some of that stuff and we thought, maybe he might like to go to a theme park. Let's try. He'd never been to a theme park. Tom he does live with his mother, but his mother is very poor and disadvantaged. There's not a lot of spare money around for him to, do things like this. We were really quite concerned because we weren't sure whether how he would go. He does use behaviours that challenge some of us, and so we were a little bit concerned, but this video is him on a ride in a place called Luna Park in Melbourne. It's our sort of main theme park. It's very, very lame. There's nothing very exciting about Luna Park, but Tom found it really exciting, so that's terrific. Oh, now I knew. Let me just see if I can. Oh, just trying to. Maybe that. Here we go. Don't know if you can hear that. Tom doesn't smile. Like, he doesn't smile. And I know that was subtle, but man, that just broke our heart. There was only me and one support worker there. We went, what do we do next? After we looked at this, of course we supported him to buy another ticket on the same ride. And again, and again, and again. And we didn't leave the theme park till 9:00 p.m. when it closed. So we took this video back to his support network, and lots of other video. So we use video all the time. This is what we do. And we sat for a day and we went through these videos. And then we came to a decision about some of the things that we thought he might like to do on the weekend. So we came up with a bit of a calendar of events. Now, I was asked to talk to a group of financial counsellors, of all people, who support people with intellectual disability around financial decisions. And they had a very clear idea that you either had decision-making capacity or you didn't. And if you didn't, it was really important that they, as the counsellor, took away that person's right to spend their money. So I used this video with them and I said, who made the financial decision about whether to buy a ticket on this ride? There's no question who made that decision. The author of that decision was Tom. This was a Saturday. I didn't want to be there necessarily. I wanted to be home with my family. I love Tom, but there was no question. It wasn't guided by us. He was the author of that decision. And he so often is. But what the video gives us power, and power is not a good word to use, but it gives us, it's a fantastic tool for us to really unpack someone's will and preference. I'm going to very quickly, I'm looking at the time, I've got 15 minutes. Yes? Got a nice big clock up there, so that's good. So my research questions, I was interested in what role do people with severe or profound intellectual disability play within a supported decision-making process? What role does a supporter play? And what factors underlie a supporter's role of responsiveness? So what we found is that the role of the supporter was to respond. The role of the supported person was simply to express their will and preference. And the role of the supporter or supporters was to respond to that will and preference. But what did that responsiveness look like? That's what we were interested in. You know, that's pretty obvious. There's two people here, but we really needed to unpack what responsiveness looked like. And what we found was that there were three parts to this responsiveness. We needed to acknowledge that a person was actually communicating. You all know that there's people that you support that communicate all the time, but their communication is often ignored. So we needed to acknowledge, not ignore, a person's communication. And then we needed to interpret. And what we found was that interpretation was best done as a team. was best done collaboratively. That onus that we've talked about, or well, I've talked about with many of you this week, of that responsibility of being the interpreter of someone's will and preference, that's the stuff that keeps you awake at night. Did I get it right? If we do it as a team, we've got more opportunity to share ideas and to try and come up with a consensus. We might not always get it right. And more often than not, we won't. But we have to try. Because if we don't try to interpret, what's the point? So this role of the supporter, what we found was that there was a whole lot of different factors that contributed to that responsiveness. So that was the functioning and the composition of the circle of support. So where a circle of support collaborated well, it worked well. Where there was lots of conflict, which where there often was, it didn't work so well. Now, the communication of a person being supported, did they communicate intentionally? So it was the level of communication. You were more likely to... the people with disability were more likely to be responded to have their will and preference responded to, if they communicated more formally and more intentionally. So supporters' attitudes, so where there was a perception of decision-making capacity, so where supporters believed that a person was able to make a decision, they were more responsive. And that's not surprising. Where they believed that the person actually communicated, they were more responsive. Characteristics of the paid support system. So resources. Often we say that what we do doesn't necessarily take resources, and that's true. But what an approach like this takes is time, and that is resource. And acceptance of relational closeness. I've been learning about gentle teaching while I've been here, and it's something that I'm certainly going to take home with me. But what I'm seeing in my work at home is that service providers or NGOs will have an objection to relational closeness, to staff members becoming close to the people they support. And that is a real problem when you have no one in your life that is not paid to be there. So this idea of relational closeness. So we unpacked what relational closeness looked like. And that's in my 10 minutes that I've got left, I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to focus on relational closeness. I'm just going to skip forward a little bit. I do want to talk to you about this piece of data though. Something that was really obvious is that this idea of risk-taking, which we know is really important, it's a really important part of our humanity, it's a really important part of our life experience. And the many of people we support are faced with a decision as to how they eat. So if they are aspirating, do you know what I mean by that? Yep. So swallowing disorders, food goes down into the lungs rather than into the stomach. This is a real problem, and it causes aspiration pneumonia, and many, many people die unnecessarily. So this decision around whether or not to have a PEG, so a tube that goes into the stomach, it was very interesting. Where someone was an unintentional communicator, that whole decision was taken away from them. Where they were more formal, so their communication was more formal, it wasn't. So here's a contrast. This is the same paid support worker talking about a decision, the same decision, but with two different men. So she says first, well, he was aspirating all the time, so he was choking. Yep. It was just too risky. We had no choice. He was always in hospital with pneumonia. Nah, even if he could participate in the decision, he would have no say. It had to go in, meaning the PEG. It was a matter of life and death. Ask Tina, the speechy, that's what we call ourselves, speech pathologists. That's just the way it had to be. Same support worker with a man who communicated more formally. Well, it was hard. Kev loves his food. I mean, he really loves his food. Hey, guys. So we knew that what he would prefer. But he had so many bouts of pneumonia and he gets so sick. But we weighed things up and it was clear that he wanted to eat orally, so through his mouth. So even though he now has a peg, the feeding tube, we let him take risks and eat most days. It's just really important to him, so it's worth the risk. So the further up that cognitive hierarchy you are, in this person's mind, the more it's okay to take risks. And we know risk-taking, chance-taking is really important. So relational closeness. What did we see? What was really important about this thing called relational closeness? And what we saw is that it was really important for people to know the stories, the history, the life stories of those they supported. I put this photo in because when I was coming back, I knew I'd forget the name of the town that I went to. I keep blocking on it. Akuredi. When you dropped me at the airport and I got on my plane little seat and there was this book. Has anyone seen this? Oh, again, what a wonderful country. So there was this book in there where people told their stories of their journeys through Iceland, and of course I wrote 7 pages. But it was, I said to myself, aren't stories important? And stories really allow us to share our humanity, I think. And this is something that we don't do well for the people that we support often. And it's usually the people who've had a lifelong disability that we don't do well with, or people that don't have someone in their life who knows and loves them. We don't have history. All we know is that they were dropped off in the institution in 1954 and when they were 2. And next thing we know, it's 2017 and here we are in a group home. So stories were really important. So we have some really lovely data around this. It's just great to hear all the stories of what she got up to from her folks. You know, she already had such an amazing life. Thanks to them, I really feel like I know her. Just looking at the family photos and talking to them, I feel really close to her, you know. Like I've known her all my life. Really, though, I've only worked with her this year. So this person didn't have a lifelong knowledge or relationship with this person. But they talked to the people who did and helped collect some of those stories. And this is a quote from a man who died during my research, from his mother at his funeral. It was everything that we all know he wanted. She's talking about the wake, so the party after the funeral. Because Dave, his cousin, you know, the one with the hair, he had all this crazy hair, he reminded me about the jelly slice, so it's a cake, that he loved before the peg when he was teeny tiny. So we had to have that after, didn't we? With a cuppa, you know. He would have loved it. So Dean was very much present in my mind at his own wake. The jelly slice was there because of his will and preference. And the other thing, just in my last 5 minutes that I've got, I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of seeing someone beyond their disability. We saw this as something that was really important to people's responsiveness, to those they supported. Kolbein Ling is a Norwegian psychologist who introduced me to this idea, and I just love it. What he asks people to do is put aside someone's disability and ask the question, who would this person be? What clothes would they wear? What car would they drive? What music would they listen to if they had complete control over their life? What would they do? So if Kevin had control over the stereo in the bus, What would he listen to? Oh, yeah, he liked some rock-type music, like AC/DC. Yeah, something with a bit of guts. Yeah, you're right, something with guts. Loud, loud, loud. Yeah, louder the better, hey, Kev. A deep, heavy bass line, don't you reckon? Nirvana or maybe even Primus. So why the hell aren't we playing Primus in the bus? if this is what we think. If Nathan had control over the food he eat, what would he eat? He'd be a foodie, I reckon. Foodie is Australian slang for someone who really loves good food. Creamy, yummy cheese, flash wine, chocolate, the works. I'm going to skip through that and present some of that more this afternoon. But as I said, we have some barriers to relational closeness. This is data from managers, and I really do think that your approach using gentle teaching is fantastic. It really, I think, would help with this issue that we have. So managers would say things like, I've told her, the support worker, that she shouldn't be dropping in there for a cuppa. She knows too much about Neil and his family. It's okay that she shares superficial things with them, tell them about what movies she has seen and what she got up to on the weekend, stuff like that. But that should be it. She's way too open with them. I think she wants to be their friend. Goodness me. Let's go back there. It was decided that the pair's relationship was wrong. Now, this was a woman that got fired from her job. That such a friendship was unprofessional and crossed the boundaries of what was acceptable. So it stopped. No more meals with the family, no more days out or festive fun. So after this research, the woman was fired because she brought this young man home for Christmas to her family because he had no one in his life that wasn't paid to be there. I don't know. We get all these mixed messages. You can't step over the line in terms of professional and personal stuff. I don't get it. It's impossible. I love this. I'm meant to care, but I'm not meant to care. We're human. So he's just not as lucky as others. Considering the importance of relational closeness that we've just talked about, the building of support was really difficult. He's just not as lucky as others in the house. The only people who really give a shit about him are us workers. Imagine a life like that. So supporters did realise this, but they knew that there were barriers. And when they see their colleague getting fired, there we go. Not going to try and say this one, but this was another one of my the sagas that apparently I absolutely had to read. The Newell, yeah. And I think that this is going to be me when I leave your beautiful country. He happened to glance up towards his home and the slopes of Hilarandi. Then he said, "How lovely the slopes are, more lovely than they have ever seemed to be before. Golden cornfields and new mown hay. I'm going back home and I will not go away." So thank you.